everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I wanted to tell you about our journey making swarms for people and how we use evolution to think about designing trustworthy robot control for real-world deployments. So my source of inspiration as a swarm engineer is this flock of birds and their ability to do beautiful, complex dances in the sky. And what's useful for real-world engineering, it is if you add birds to this flock, it can continue to fly, so they can scale to huge numbers. If a bird crashes to the ground, the whole flock doesn't crash, so they're robust to individual failure. And together they can do more than the sum of their parts. For example, they might be better at avoiding predators as a collective. Now, what's fascinating as a swarm engineer is that this is the result not of a leader bird telling every bird what to do, but each bird reacting to the local world around them. And then what emerges are these beautiful flocking patterns. And you see examples of self-organization of swarming everywhere in nature, whether it's ants creating a trail to your picnic table, bees making a decision about their next nest site, or ability to grow fully functioning human beings from just a couple cells. Now, how do we go about engineering these swarm behaviors? Well, that's the challenge, right? How do you find the individual and its local interaction so that you get the desired collective behavior? Just like if you were to take the bird out of the sky and look at it, that wouldn't tell you how flocking emerges. So how do we go about doing that? Well, one way is to use bioinspiration, to take biologists' word for how they think or their animal systems might operate, simplify them, abstract them, and then put them on real robot systems. So here what you see in the upper left is a swarm of flying robots. I'm behind the camera here over in Dario Floriano's lab doing flocking rules. And in the upper right, you're seeing a swarm of 100 coin-sized robots in the lab creating trails inspired from how ants create trails to areas of interest. In the bottom left, you're looking at a swarm of 400 coin-sized robots sharing local information to reach consensus. In this case, that means them all turning blue, which they do quite successfully, inspired from how honeybees make decisions. And on the bottom right, you see this blob of 350 coin robots behaving like cells and growing these limbed structures. And that's work with biologists to describe how we grow our digits as we develop in the belly. And so quite fun to see how we can use these rules and put them on robot systems. But very often we don't have rules to start with. And so I wanted to spend more time on this aspect because I think it's more relevant for this workshop. And that's how do we do automatic exploration of agents and their local interaction towards desired swarm rules. And typically we do that using artificial evolution in my world, but you could use reinforcement learning or other methods to do that in your worlds. So the things that I care about is how do we make our evolved or automatic solutions scalable so that they can operate on many robots? How do we make them so that they're adaptable? How do we make them so that the controllers that we design are understandable and so that we can control the swarm as a result of this automatic process? And ideally feed in as well elements of trustworthiness so that what we deploy on these real systems is something that people are comfortable with. So on the scalability side, what we tend to do, but there's many different ways of doing this. So here what I'm saying are just our ways of doing it, and it doesn't preclude anything that you are working on. But we tend to look at reactive controllers, so robots that react to the world around them. And we tend to look at homogeneous controllers or few types of controllers. And that allows us to scale to very large numbers in terms of our automatic design of the system. And we've been doing this for a very long time. I'm scared to say that this is almost 15 years ago that we were evolving controllers for swarms of flying robots in Dario Floriano's lab. And the aim was to have these swarms create communication networks for rescuers. And each robot wing here operated using this very simple feed-forward neural network. And as input, it just had a compass and its ability to communicate with its local environment. And what you're seeing here on the upper right is what was evolved as the controller. So we would launch 20 virtual robots. They would create a chain. The chain would search the environment, and communication would be established between those two rescuers. Because it was quite a simple controller, we could reverse engineer it, put it on real aircrafts. And basically here you're looking at different aspects of it where they create a trail, this chain synchronizes, so they're able to sweep the environment, and then they're able to connect those two rescuers on the ground. So that was our first instance in my world of evolving these controllers that were very reactive, could work in decent numbers, and could be put on real aircrafts, but it was really only 10 robots. And so that got me excited about the field of nanomedicine and the ability of nanoparticles to leak out of vessels into certain types of tumor environments. And these nanoparticles operate in the 10 to the power 13. So that's a huge number if you care about scales. And on top of that, the laboratory, Sangeeta Bhattia's laboratory at MIT, where I used to work, could make them in different sizes, different shapes, different charges. You can make them of materials that could react to energy, like magnetic fields or light. And you could decorate these particles with molecules that allow them to interact with the surface of cancer cells, for example, or with each other. And so this is a world where fundamentally the control of the particle is embedded in the design of the particle itself and its ability to interact with that local world around them. So because this is a games workshop, I thought I'd mention the game that we designed to help us explore how you turn the knob on the design of those particles. And in this game, there were cancer cells, there were healthy cells, there were treatment dosages. You could combine different types of particles. Some of these particles could change their size, which made them go fast or slow. You had cancer cells with molecules on their surface and particles that could stick to those surfaces with certain stickiness. And you can make smart materials where if you trigger something, then it releases a particle in the environment, and you can make them self-assemble and disassemble. So not unlike my robots, the flying robots that I programmed before, these particles could sense their environment. They could act on their environment by releasing something, for example, a drug. Depending on what they release, that could trigger another nanoparticle. So now all of a sudden they're communicating. And although I couldn't make them go left and right like the flying robots that you saw, they can speed up or slow down based on self-assembly or disassembly. And so using this game, there were around 120,000 simulations around the world. This is an example of a very sticky particle that leaks out and kills only one line of cells because the cells all eat up the particles and they never go deep in the tissue. This, by the way, is modeled on real parameters, and it turns out that that is a real problem. Particles that sound so good when you test them in a dish because you're mixing the dish really well, but don't work in the biological system because they don't penetrate into the tumor. And then we thought, because we're optimizers, that could be done as well without the humans in the loop in that case. And so we created a framework along with collaborators in the Evo Nano project, which is a European project, where we could grow tumors, slice it into lots of little tiny simulated tumor slices, and then run artificial evolution to change all the designs of those particles to optimally treat those simulated tumor environments. So both the flying robots and those particles had reactive controllers, pretty similar across the different particles or the robots, and that allowed us to scale to very large numbers. In terms of the adaptability, we're really interested in how we evolve these systems so that they can react to the environment they're given. And so in the work that you're seeing here, we have a swarm of XPUCs with a GPU on board. So they're about this big. So they have a GPU, and that allows them to onboard, run evolution to learn how to swarm in around 15 minutes in real time. And what are they learning to do? They're learning to push this frisbee from the center of the arena to the right side of the arena. So you can see this is generation 1, 2, 3. They're a bit clumsy about it, but over the 15 minutes, they're able to learn how to swarm. And this is an example where each agent is evolving its own behavior, but they're sharing that through communication. And then over the swarm, you end up almost converging to a single type of controller that works quite well for this swarm. So that allows us to adapt to different environments because you don't even need to tell the swarm how to behave before it's actually within the environment that you give it. So then the question is, how do you make sense of these systems? And so we've limited, the first example that you saw was a neural network, but we're now rolling back on that for some applications to try to avoid the black box problem, unless it's for perception. I think that's a different use. And so in the behavior that you saw before with those robots pushing the frisbee, this is actually what emerged from the controller that was on board each robot. And what this is a behavior tree. It's used in the gaming industry. And that allows us to read out the behavior of the individual robots quite readily. And because they're all the same controller, then we can sort of reason about the swarm as a collective. And you can encode lots of tools. For example, this robot, you can tell that it started in behavior B2, which is this part of the tree, and then it turned around and saw the frisbee transition to B1. And so you can think about what it is your robot is doing over time. Now, with this ability to understand what the swarm is doing through its behavior tree, we also thought that this might be a useful tool to be able to extract behaviors from videos. And why is this useful? Well, if you give a video of either a biological swarm or you give a video of a real robot swarm, maybe a swarm that's not doing what you want it to do and you would like to be able to control it or hinder its activities, then you need to think about what it is that swarm is doing. And so what we've been working on is a tool to look at these videos and automatically extract a behavior tree controller that would allow us to either explain what that swarm was doing, translate it to another device. Say there's a cool bioinspiration and we want to put it on robots. What if that could be automatic and control the swarm if it's not doing what we want, or in the animal system, perhaps to guide it away from harm's way. So how does this system work? Well, we start with an original swarm behavior that's presented to us as a video. We extract metrics about that swarm behavior using the trajectories of the robots. And then that defines our fitness function, which is what we're trying to optimize. And we use an evolutionary algorithm where we generate lots of random behavior trees, generate a video, its trajectories, look at the swarm metrics, and we're trying to minimize the distance between those swarm metrics over time. And what we're left with is a behavior tree that we hope is able to extract the original behavior tree that was given to us. In order to bootstrap that, we generate in silico our data sets, and our data sets look at swarms that can move in environments, interact with areas, which you see in gray, and pick up boxes or drop them off, which you see in blue. And so here you're looking at an original swarm behavior on the left and the extracted swarm behavior on the right, and you're looking at their trees. So this is an exact match where we're able to exactly extract what was generated in the first example. It's quite a challenging problem because it turns out there's many different ways that you can extract behavior trees that look the same but are not exactly the same. So here's a good example where we don't have the same behavior tree extracted, but if you look at those behaviors qualitatively, they look very similar. And actually, if you reason about them in the human sense, they're equivalent. And so we have a lot of work to do. So if anyone has good tips on how we can get equivalence for these types of environment, these types of trees, beyond the metrics, that would be really useful. But we are in a stage where we can generate either hypotheses, lots of trees for a given environment, which could be useful for biologists, or sometimes the exact one, sometimes not quite the exact one, but something that captures the essence of what we were trying to do. And then there's the question of how we make these systems controllable, using very little input from an operator. And this makes sense if you want to put them in the real world. So to do this, what we've decided to look at recently is if you have a swarm and they're operating in a distributed way, but at the supervisory level, either a human or an AI is able to send high-level commands like swarm in this way, swarm in that way, and then the distributed behavior is responsible for delivering that high-level swarm command. And the question is, how do you control the swarm and what commands do you give it? So again, here we've been using artificial evolution to come up with behavior trees, again, that allow us to give high-level commands to a swarm that then distribute that command at the level of the collective. And so to just give you a sense of what comes out of that process, here what you're looking at is a swarm of robots exploring the Bristol Robotics Laboratory. So this is the real footprint of our lab. And on the upper right, that's what you want to look at. In green, it says east, south, east, northeast. And those are the high-level commands sent through the evolved supervisor of the system. And it's actually quite surprising. You don't need that many changes to navigate this whole environment using very simple local interactions. You'd expect, if you were to plan this, to have to go into all the little bits and there's probably 10 commands or so at the level of the supervisor to control this swarm in this very complex environment. And so there's a question of how you use that. Do we use it for the sake of us understanding what's happening, so we continue with this evolution of the supervisor, or do we use it to train humans to understand how best to control swarms and have a feedback loop where they have the power, but they have a better understanding of what works or doesn't work in the control of these swarm systems? And then finally, there's the question of how do you make these trustworthy by allowing users to define the preferences that they have in their system. And with anyone who does learning or evolution, the question is, what do you measure? What is the metric in your system? And very often we focus on these key performance indicators. How fast are you? How costly is it? How good were you at doing the task that you set out to do? But in the swarm world, what we've tried to start doing is to formalize other metrics that allow us to capture things we care about, like the scalability, which is the top one here, the robustness, the fault tolerance, and the adaptability of our swarm in different environments. And so these give us new tools. We haven't put them in the context. Actually, we have for the robustness in the context of evolution yet, but these are things we're working up now. So we have metrics to give us more power in exploring things people care about. And here's just one example in which we use this. So this is an example of a logistics task where robots need to move boxes. And the user defines what they think is important for them to trust the system. So for example, they might care about safety above performance, or they might care about energy performance above safety. And these are all things that we can't really decide. It's up to the user or the operator to figure out what they find trustworthy. But what we can do as a result of that is tension possible solutions for that operator. So in this case, for example, you might be very effective, very good performance, but as a result of that, you're not safe because all your robots are moving very fast. And so what we use is map elites to illuminate all these different constraints that we have on our system to allow the user to navigate that space of possible solutions for the control of the swarm. So here the control happens by outlining what you care about and then automatically generating lots of solutions that the operator can navigate to make use what they think is the right solution. And then in terms of trustworthiness, because we're looking at understandable systems, we then have the opportunity to think about how do you specify, verify, and validate these systems. And so we've adopted a framework from the machine learning community called AMLAS. And ours focuses, rather than on machine learning, focuses on emergent behaviors of swarms. So it's called EROS. And this framework is allowing us to scratch the surface in terms of how we specify swarm behaviors, so have lots of things we care about in the deployment of the swarm, and then how we go from macroscopic formal models, which we can because we have these trees that we can convert in that way, to low fidelity simulations, to high fidelity simulations, to real robots, and also having formal verification in the mix. So we've gone through this whole pipeline now with one example of a swarm, which should be coming out soon. So those are the capabilities for potentially autonomously designing these swarm systems. But really, what do people want with these swarms? And so what we've done is we've started asking people what's important for them. We designed an escape room where we trapped people in a little room before COVID, and they had 30 minutes or so to escape and to learn about swarm robotics. And then we asked them areas where they thought swarms would be useful, things that we've been thinking about, things like farming, cleaning the ocean, source monitoring, search and rescue, things that people find are better uses, less good uses. And one thing that really piqued our interest is the thought of robots that are used out of the box in any environment, and in particular in logistics. So you might have seen scooters in your cities. I don't know if you have little scooters you can jump on and they bring you wherever you want to go. And we've started wondering what the equivalent is for robots in logistics that sit at the corner of your neighborhood, maybe hidden away. And then if you have a pair of jeans you want to swap with your neighbor, or you want to pick up a croissant, or you don't need something and you store it in the communal warehouse, or you have extra food and you want to give that to someone who might enjoy your curry, then if you can move goods as easily as you can move people with those scooters, what does that enable in terms of a circular local economy? And could these robots be within small SMEs, small places that don't typically adopt robots because they don't have the infrastructure, the resources like a big Amazon robot swarm deployment would? And so the reason this makes sense, the reason this makes sense as an out-of-the-box solution, I'll give you an example, actually. So imagine there was a cloakroom at this conference. Was there a cloakroom? I didn't find one. I don't know if anyone found a cloakroom. Maybe I need to put my hands there. But imagine there's a robot cloakroom at this conference. And you could set it up in a very centralized way. And in that centralized way, the operator of the cloakroom would come and make a map of the environment. And then they'd set a central computer in that environment. And then the user would come with their jacket to that central computer and say, okay, robot 1, 2, 3, follow this trajectory, come pick up your jacket. So you put the jacket in the bin and it says robot 1, 2, 3, go over here, and it stores that in a database. So when you come back at the end of the day, that central computer is able to, again, direct the right robot with your jacket to the right location. That's the job done. But it has required that central controller to work. It's required the database to be up to date. It's required a map of that environment. If you do this in a more distributed way, the way you do it is you'd put lines on the floor, and the robots would move around in that environment. And when you arrive with your phone, with the Bluetooth app, you arrive anywhere along the cloakroom and say, I have a jacket for you. And then one of the robots would come to you, put your jacket in the box, and it deposits the box anywhere in the environment. And then at the end of the day, you come back with your Bluetooth app somewhere and you say, has anyone seen my jacket? And because there's enough robots, they look around and they find your jacket immediately and bring it back to you. So in that world, there was no database. In fact, you could go and pick up your jacket by yourself and it wouldn't mess up the system. There was no central communication. There was no map in that environment. It was all reactive to the world around them. And so that's the type of thing we want to put in place. But the reason we haven't been able to is because our robot swarms don't have the perception they need to really understand those complex worlds around them, even in a very local sense. So we've created this new robot called the DOTS for Distributed Organization and Transport System. And it has very fast wheels, lifter, it has 4 cameras, it has a laser time of flight range scanner, it has 6 CPUs, a GPU, battery lasts for 6-7 hours. And it's about this big, it's like a vacuum cleaner. And so this is allowing us to start exploring the ability of robots to just buzz around and interact with their local environment. So this is a version of our cloakroom, I guess, in the lab. And here they're only using local onboard perception to be able to control their behavior. I have an agreement with my neighborhood to try that first vision that you saw, but I don't know, we'll see. Maybe in a year or so. And through those local communication, you can do things that are more sophisticated. So this is a project on how do we give emergent distributed spatial awareness or emergent awareness to the swarm. And in this swarm, simulated here only, they exchange very local information about what they perceive, and they all converge to what they think is the center of the world. And as a result of that convergence, they can then do things that look very global, like creating shapes or following specific patterns. So these are things that we're exploring. How do you map this messy distributed world to what we actually want to do sometimes in a more centralized way? On the real world side, we're also looking at how we can deploy swarms of drones. So here you see very large robots designed by wind racers and distributed avionics. They can travel 1,000 kilometers and carry 200 kilos. And so that opens up new opportunities in terms of deploying or searching for forest fires, in our case, over huge scales, like the scale of California, or they were recently into Antarctica with their drone. And so it takes, to give you a sense of scale, about 30 drones to cover 24/7, a state the size of California, if you have that type of drone. So we look at different types of algorithms. These aren't evolved, so I need to take the things I told you before and start putting them in these contexts, but just in terms of pushing things to reality. And this is what it looks like when we trial them. This was last summer with smaller drones, but this summer we're going to be trying with the big drones as a proof of concept. And then the whole challenge is, again, how do you monitor a swarm if you're a firefighter? So we've been speaking to 50 firefighters to see them, how they would do it, because actually a lot of them are pilots of drones. So they can make this leap in their head of, I'm going to be a swarm operator rather than a drone operator, which is actually quite good in terms of not replacing them, but having them be the people who grow into the role of swarm operator. And then most recently, we've been looking at basking shark using our swarms. So these are our water-based crafts. This is work by Elliot Scott. And the goal is to look at their raker gills in the water. I think this is probably one of the last examples. Here's another swarm that we've been deploying in reality. So these are tiles. They're swarms of screens on wheels, and we use them for social interaction. So these robots are more used to interact with the crowd, ask them questions about climate change. Here at the bottom left, we're asking them what they would do to impact climate change. And they can say, for example, I'd take more public transport, or I'd eat more vegetarian food. And their opinion lives as a physical avatar in that environment for others to interact with or change the opinion. And so that allows for decision-making, but in a physical space where other people's opinions are present in that space too. We recently used them as well as puzzles and in the V&A museum, and people could connect to them and use them as pixels to make little art forms. So this was during COVID, and people could connect and create little soccer players or whatever they wanted. And this is Marahan using them as Post-it notes. So you can write in free form, and then they cluster automatically depending on what's on them. So this was again about climate change. So you'd have the public transport cluster. You'd have basically just like you would move Post-it notes on a board, except the robots do that job for you. So I hope I've brought you a bit on a journey from, yes, automatic exploration is really useful if you're designing individual agent controllers for swarm. The things we care about in terms of making them scalable, adaptable, understandable, controllable, and trustworthy. And this step we still need to make from the automatic exploration to actually getting things out into reality. A plug for the workshop on Friday. Some of the organizers are here on breaking swarm stereotypes if you're interested in that. And this is all very collaborative. So very grateful for my colleagues and students and postdocs. Okay, thank you.
We have time for questions. quick one. Maybe I'll just project. Very nice talk. When you were discussing the automatic extraction of plants, I'm presuming those are like behavior trees?
They're behavior trees. So we end up with a small behavior tree. The ones that you saw there were the behavior trees extracted from those videos. Yeah.
Sure, we need this study.
No, so sometimes the same behavior could have two different behavior trees, and that's a challenge we face. Yeah.
But in the context of maybe thinking about things like nanoforests and other approaches to automate that generation.
We haven't, but it would be great to. It would make a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah.
About the list, that list is about a lot of safety constraints in the industry. So I want to know how you encode so many constraints to the agent.
Yes. So, that's very interesting. So this was work where these ones, it's this, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So this was the cloakroom scenario, and we were focused on the emergent behavior and making sure the cloakroom didn't do something we didn't want. And in particular, one of these is don't block the fire exit. So that would be an emergent behavior because you need multiple robots by accident through our behavior to be blocking the fire exit of that system. So in this context, we give the system a behavior tree, and then we go through specification, verification, and validation. But now that we have this pipeline, what would be brilliant is to check if you can do all those things and then feed that into the evolution so that from the start you evolve a controller that passes all those checks. The constraints are not applied to the evolutionary process now. Yeah.